Welcome back to part 2 of Murder with Friends. This is gonna be a 2-part episode today. I'm joined by Amir, and we're gonna be discussing angels of death, specifically 3 angels of death that we gave you an introduction to in part 1, so check that out if you're lost. We're talking about Charles Cullen, Miyuki Ishikawa, and Jolly Jane Toppan. And we outlined what they did, and now I think you have to ask the question of why, and also how society treated these cases, because all 3 have been regarded very differently in hindsight. So to get the conversation going, let's go to another video element put together by our editors and the wonderful Mary Ignatova.
How have courts defined criminal responsibility for those that claim to kill with compassion? If a killer believes they are right at the time of the killing, are they then insane? At Charles Cullen's trial, Judge Paul Armstrong said the court would not countenance the characterization of these crimes as acts of human compassion. But public perception of Miyuki Ishikawa was remarkably understanding, despite her kill count. And Jolly Jane is now something of a folk legend. Do we qualify their crimes differently than other serial killers? And if we do, why?
All right, so let's just get the conversation going. Killing with compassion. We're talking about these 3 individuals today. Did they kill with compassion?
No, absolutely not. None of these 3 that we picked, I don't think any of their intentions were at any point compassionate. The one I would say maybe the closest who in their own head, they may have had a delusional idea that they were being compassionate was Charles Cullen.
Really?
Yeah. And I'm not saying that it was a delusion, that he was being compassionate and like that he was doing this because they were in great pain or something and he wanted to lessen their pain.
So I would actually say, I think Miyuki Ishikawa was probably the one who had the greatest delusion of acting compassionately and with mercy. Because I think that it's worth noting that she did not have any children herself. She'd worked as a maternity nurse for as long as we can find records of. Not forever, but like that was her main job. And I think that she sort of viewed babies as like her job, as like her task, that these really weren't lives with a future, especially when they were neglected and just sort of thrown out by the parents. I think she viewed these kids as not even really kids, as just like lives that really had no future. So I'm just gonna act on this.
So she seemed more calculating to me. Like it was almost like math to her. That there was this issue with that there was all these kids and they weren't gonna be able to take care of them. I mean, even though you would, like the other option is don't kill them and like these poor parents just have to figure it out. But instead she was like, okay, there's a problem right here, how can we fix it? Oh, I'm gonna take this number of kids and just neglect them and they're gonna die and they're solve the problem right there. The reason I think Charles Cullen had these delusions of compassion is I feel like at some point in his life, he was so suicidal, and then he realized that I can project all these terrible feelings that I have on these sick people and put them out of their misery. And to me, that's gonna give me the same gratification that I was trying to get from taking my own life.
Another sort of weird thing about Charles Cullen that stuck out to me was his many suicide attempts and how freely he was able to move in between hospitals while also very overtly kind of dealing with mental issues. You hear from the people that lived in his apartment complex that he was known to sort of give them weird stares and to make weird noises, and they knew that he had made attempts on his own life many times.
He tried to light a barbecue in his bathtub and try to die from the carbon monoxide.
And then when they asked him about it, he said he was trying to heat his bathtub. Like he didn't really have any reasons for this. And what's curious today is that when you ask Charles Cullen about this, when people have asked him about how are you able to, you were so clearly on the verge and like struggling through something, how were you fit? How did 9 different hospitals deem that you were fit, suitable enough to be helping other patients get well when you yourself were so unwell? And he's like, yeah, I don't know. I have no idea. You know, hospitals definitely
there was a lack of protocol back then on just these things, because you read his bio and he had so many different jobs at so many different hospitals in the period of time when he was killing all these people. And he would just jump around, kill a bunch of people, move on to the next place, and there was no problem.
Well, what's worth noting is that digoxin is a very difficult drug to find in an autopsy unless you're testing for it specifically. That's what I found out. So insulin is a little bit more obvious when performing just a regular autopsy or just a straight autopsy, but digoxin, the drug of choice where he killed most of his victims through that, was far more difficult to test for. So he was able to go undetected, but hospitals absolutely found a correlation between the rooms that he would check in on and the sort of strange deaths from elderly patients. So that's how another reason why he was able to get away with it for so long, that seemed out of the blue. One account that I read about Charles Cullen's hospital stint as well was that a woman that he'd worked with, a nurse that he'd worked with, sort of said that his behavior was a little bit strange, and she ended up getting fired for that, which is just absolutely bonkers crazy and totally, like, I mean, it sort of speaks to the level of incompetence that the hospitals had when it comes to oversight. And you just sort of read through Charles Cullen's story, and it's like, you want someone to sound the alarm, and then someone does, and he just moves to another hospital between New Jersey and Pennsylvania, and he's able to sort of lie his way out of enough background questions that he can keep getting work. And it's just absolutely unacceptable.
And you were saying that during this specific period of time when Charles Cullen was active, there was a shortage of nurses.
Yeah,
so
that's
like,
what I read.
It was like he was at the right place at the right time in history, kind of, to get away with these things for so long.
Yeah, and I think that culture and like the time period is so important to contextualize these three different stories. For example, Miyuki Ishikawa, this is something worth noting. Japanese tradition had disputed the rights of infants at around this time.
Right.
Cases of infanticide by a parent had typically been regarded as bodily injury resulting in death under the criminal code of Japan until 1907. So when that was relaxed, then you see that a lot of these crimes of foster kids, foster babies being murdered started occurring, and then Miyuki Ishikawa and her accomplices were just the ones that were caught with so many deaths on their hands.
So you have these social forces exerting a lot of influence onto creating this environment for these crimes to happen.
Yeah.
So for Jolly Jane, what do you think those factors would be?
It's hard to tell, but something that I found strange about in her confession is at some point in time she says, if only I'd had a husband and I'd had kids, I would have been too busy taking care of the kids and having a husband to commit murder. But Jolly Jane is
I'm not buying that.
I'm not buying it either. And what's strange to me is that she said that she wasn't insane, but was still found to be innocent by way of insanity, or not guilty, she's not innocent, but not guilty by way of insanity. She spent the rest of her life till she was in her 80s in an insane asylum. But I think that she was like way more stable than Charles Cullen, who I think actually was very delusional. And you see some of this early behavior, like that story about him and the scrubs on a submarine is just strange. And I think that Jolly Jane knew what she was doing. In fact, one of her last victims, one of the ones that really alerted people to what she was doing, she said that she killed this person because she lost the rest of her family and she felt bad for her. The reason why this person lost her family was because Jolly Jane killed her entire family.
One by one, it's crazy. You hear that one
the
family.
Whole Davis
she
family.
started with the husband, and then like a week later, the wife, and then the two kids after that.
Yeah.
Just poisoning them.
But what a mix of that. So you see that she feels she's killing this person out of compassion because she lives with them. She's their caretaker. She's their nurse. She, some of the people that she had murdered, their families would say, oh, it's so good that Jolly Jane was with her until she died. She didn't feel alone.
She had a great personality.
And you're like, oh my God, she was killing her. Sorry. It's just kind of wild to think about. But then, so it's this weird like cocktail of compassion and like absolute moral depravity at the same time. Because I think that Jolly Jane probably did feel that, well, her whole family has been murdered by me. And so she's so sad and alone here at the house with just me. So I should kill her, she'll be happier, she'll be with her family. It's so messed up.
Yeah.
But I don't think that she was insane at all. But Charles Cullen, I do think I think that
There was one quote by him that said he couldn't stand, when he started really killing people, he couldn't stand seeing these sick people struggling in and out and having, like, he couldn't stand watching them being coded, I think he said, which coded means stands for like code blue or something.
Yeah, so it's like different codes.
Yeah,
and,
and that means like when they start like pretty much like when the buzzer goes off and like they have to run in and they have to help save this person. He couldn't stand seeing that anymore for certain patients. And he couldn't stand like people trying to rush and help these people come back to life. But then when like they keep interviewing him even more, they see that like a lot of these people would have been totally fine if like they were gonna get out of the hospital eventually. So, and
you can find clips online of the families addressing Charles Cullen, just saying like, you didn't even know my brother and he was on the road to recovery, and you like, how could you have done that? And then you just see that, I think it was a little bit, what was the word that you used? It's sort of like surrogate.
He was projecting.
He was projecting, I think,
his own suicidal tendencies. And I think my take on this, and like obviously I'm not a psychiatrist or anything, but like a psychologist, but he was getting a certain level of gratification from the idea of death, and initially it was like him trying to kill himself to obtain that. And then he realized, I can project this onto someone else and get that same level of gratification, if not even more. And so he started doing that.
And that's another
all of his victims.
Connection that I think we can make between Jolly Jane and Charles Cullen is that they both received some level of gratification. I think that you hear stories about Jolly Jane injecting morphine and then atropine. So basically like making someone's heart like totally relax and they're just like about to just die, and then giving them some atropine, and then they're like jolted back awake, and just messing with life and death and getting a thrill from that. Conversely, I think Miyuki Ishikawa didn't get a thrill from these deaths. I think that for her, it was sort of, it's a combination. It was calculated in the sense of like, she knew that she could make a lucrative business out of extorting these families for the lives of their babies. And I also do not think that she valued the lives of these babies whatsoever. I mean, we're talking about some crazy mass graves, one that was apparently underneath a temple that police came upon. What's curious about this too, that Amir and I have gone back and forth on, is that the police at the time were able to determine that the children had not died of natural causes. But what does that then mean? Because if they were just neglected.
You had a really good theory though.
So this is what I think might have happened. I think that she sort of sequestered the children that she had decided were going to be neglected, that maybe she'd received the monetary amount that she needed from the parents to just do away with these children. And potentially there were mass graves and they just put all these neglected, sickly kids in these graves and then just covered it up. Because otherwise, when you think about like, how does a mass grave work? And I know nothing of digging them, but you wouldn't just dig up a grave over and over again, put like, okay, here's one baby, and then like close everything up again. And then, so I think that there were probably big volumes of kids that were being killed at any given time. Buried alive while under her care. Otherwise, like, how would you determine that it wasn't natural causes? It's super, super eerie.
Chilling, yeah.
So these days, Jolly Jane has become a little bit of a folk legend. You can hear about her on very popular podcasts like Criminal and Lore, and you get their songs, and there have been plays and all this stuff written about her. And she's sort of characterized in a very different light than we look at Charles Cullen, even though there is definitely some overlap in their crimes, and I think somewhat in their motivations and their own psychosis as well. Why do you think that is, Amir? Do you think that's just because of time, and you can't, like with Charles Cullen, you can watch videos of the victims' families being like, you suck, fuck you, we're brokenhearted over this. But Jolly Jane, it's just newspaper clippings, it feels removed.
Yeah, and she has this nickname, Jolly Jane, and just the different stories, the mythology around how she would kill her victims. There's been so much time in between then and now that I think it turns into folklore. It's almost novel to think about these things.
Would that happen with Charles Cullen?
I don't think so. Charles Cullen it hits too close to home at this point. Like he was going in and out of a hospital system that we can relate to today. Whereas Jolly Jane was like living in a time when there was servants in people's houses and she would go give them strychnine, like just like weird just types of poisons that you only hear in old mystery novels.
Yeah.
So it doesn't feel the same.
And what about Miyuki Ishikawa?
I don't know, even her, she didn't have like a fun, I'm sorry, like fun is like a really bad descriptor to use, but like she just seems so much more cold and calculating, while Jolly Jane just has like all the different ingredients for a perfect folk legend.
Yeah, I think that what it comes down to is if you can characterize it as like this one person was crazy and had this weird upbringing and went from house to house as just this crazy person killing people, but everyone thought that she was such a nice caregiver. And then you juxtapose that with Miyuki Ishikawa, who was like from a very desperate time in Japanese history, who was probably very cold and calculated because she was raised in a time where that's how you made it. Like that's how you survived, and this was her job. And she, was she sort of like morally corrupt? Absolutely, but there were other accomplices that worked with her that were conditioned because of how they were raised. Whereas Jolly Jane, you're like, whoa, these people were really nice to you. Like these were people that you got to know that were very fond of you. And then I think with Charles Cullen, there's an even further removal because he, when you're spiking insulin, when you're spiking saline bags, you don't even know who you're killing. You're just trying to kill someone.
Yeah.
And it seems like you were just trying to kill yourself.
Yeah.
And you couldn't do that, so you just killed everyone in your path.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing that up. So when they finally caught him, he made a deal with the detective saying that like, if you guys promise not to give me the death penalty, I will help you guys find out like all the different people that I killed. And like he took that deal.
Isn't that so weird?
It's so weird because this guy like he had so many suicide attempts, but at the end of the day, he was afraid of death.
Yeah.
Just not when it was someone else.
There's so much to get into with these guys. That's gonna do it for us today. These were 3 angels of death, but there are so many more. I'd be interested to hear what your thoughts are. What do you think about the mercy killings, killing out of compassion? How do you rationalize it? Let's all just become ethical accountants in the comment section below. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel, and we will see you next time on Murder with Friends.